how many of you have been craving to stay concentrated, whether it's the breath or the body. In my book entitled The Craving Mind, I wrote a chapter called "Why is it so hard to concentrate? Or is it?" And this came from an exploration from my own experience of really struggling with staying concentrated. Whether it's the breath or another object, would really struggle, and even on retreats sweating through t-shirts, just really trying to force myself to concentrate. There are, some of you may have heard of this list of 7 things called the factors of awakening. I thought maybe this morning we could explore that a little bit in the instruction. I had at first kind of memorized it as a list, and that wasn't that helpful for me. But in one particular teaching, they're taught in a particular order. And when I explored that experientially, I found it extremely helpful. So perhaps it will be helpful for you, perhaps not. You can see. We can maybe use the analogy of reading a book, or even apply this to the breath as I walk through these 7 factors. The first factor is basically is mindfulness. So when we pay attention, we bring awareness to the object. So if the object's a book or our breath, we can bring awareness to it. But if it's kind of boring, it's going to be really hard to read the book. If the breath seems kind of boring, it might feel like a struggle to continue to pay attention to it. So when this factor is brought together with the second factor of awakening, interest or curiosity, something interesting happens. So if it's a book that's interesting, suddenly it's less of a struggle to pay attention because we're interested. We want to know how the story unfolds. If it's the breath, counting in and out, our brain might get bored with that over time. Yet if we become interested, is it a long breath? Is this one going to be a long breath? I don't know how that story ends. Naturally we're drawn in. We don't have to do anything about the breath. We simply get interested. And we have to follow the story. That was a short breath. Interesting. What about the next one? Is it the same story? Often it's not the same story. So we can start to bring interest to anything. Suddenly the breath becomes a story of its own. We can bring curiosity to, when is that in-breath going to end? When is the out-breath going to begin? And notice how that curiosity naturally holds our attention. This is like rubbing two sticks together and we start to create friction. Mindfulness and interest. When we become interested and we pay attention, suddenly when those sticks rub together enough, there's energy. So this third factor of awakening, sometimes translated as courageous energy, arises. So if it's a good book, we have the energy to read. We don't fall asleep. We naturally have that energy to continue seeing how that story unfolds. So too with an object. We can notice how energy arises naturally out of these conditions. That's the third factor. When there's energy based on interest and awareness, if that book is really good, suddenly we become enraptured. So rapture, or even joy, is a translation of this fourth factor of awakening. We become enraptured with the book. Wow, this story is really interesting. So noticing how that interest and that awareness carry us into the next two factors of awakening. Where there's rapture, where there's joy, feels good. There's a calming. And that is the fifth factor of awakening. So tranquility. So when we become enraptured, there's this natural tranquil state. If we're really into a good book, we can sit and read for hours. If we're really into a good breath, we can sit and pay attention for moments, right, as we string these moments together. Notice how none of these take any force. None of these take any drive, any white knuckling. They simply arise out of conditions. So awareness, factor number 1. Interest, factor number 2. Energy, factor number 3. Rapture, joy, factor number 4. Tranquility, factor number 5. Here's the suspenseful part of the story. What's number 6? Concentration. Wait a minute. Concentration arises out of conditions? I don't have to force myself to concentrate? Was it placed incorrectly in the list? Wasn't that supposed to be number 1 or number 2? When we're interested, when we've got the energy, when we're enraptured, when we're tranquil, these conditions set up concentration. Concentration naturally arises out of these conditions. No force necessary, no effort required. Just like if you're noticing that you're interested in hearing how all of these factors come together, your mind might not be scattered. It might not take a lot of force to pay attention. And importantly, it's not some cognitive skill. I have to remember these things. It's simply about noticing how they naturally unfold. Bringing awareness and curiosity together, rubbing those two sticks. So concentration arises. And then the seventh factor of awakening arises out of those conditions. Equanimity. We become equanimous. If we're reading a really good book and we're so concentrated on it, there can be all sorts of mayhem happening around us, yet we don't notice. We're that concentrated. We're not moved by the external conditions, the circumstances. Somebody might be screaming in the background, we don't notice. Our mind isn't trying to distract us to do other things because we're concentrated. So that equanimity, that imperturbability, that non-reactivity naturally arises out of those conditions. So this morning, we can play with these conditions. We can find an object, whether it's the breath, whether it's the body, whether it's anything else. And bring these first two factors of awakening together. Paying attention, bringing awareness, being curious. Oh. Is that breath a long or a short breath? Oh. There are an endless number of things within the breath, within the body, within whatever our object is that we can be curious about. And if boredom arises, what does boredom feel like? As that becomes our momentary object. Interesting. We can explore boredom and become concentrated simply through noticing and becoming interested in that phenomena. So our mission this morning, should we choose to accept it, is to play. Literally play with curiosity. As we bring it together with awareness, bring these to an object. And watch what unfolds.